The last time she hit me, I was 19 and already taller than her, but I still flinched like I was 6. She didn't use her hands anymore. She'd evolved. Her weapons became scripture and silence God's judgment, leaking from her mouth like venom. And that night it was about my pants being tight and my voice being disrespectful. She was holding her wedding Bible like it was a brick, flinging verses like broken glass. "You mock the Lord with how you walk," she snapped. "You shame this family." I stood still in the kitchen, holding a bowl of rice, the air thick with boiled cabbage and old perfume. My shoulders didn't move. My throat was dry. The ceiling light flickered overhead like it didn't want to witness this. She pointed. "You think you're safe now that you've grown breasts and changed your name." I was 26, visiting. Just for one night. A favor to my cousin whose wedding was the next day. I thought I could survive one dinner. One fucking dinner. But her voice was still the needle in my spine. She screamed something about demons and Jezebel and snatched the bowl from my hand. It cracked against the edge of the counter. Rice hit the floor like teeth. And then she picked up my old drawing book, the one I had hidden behind the furnace in the basement. She flipped it open and laughed. "Still drawing your little lies, huh?" My throat burned, my hands curled. The drawings, dates, words, tiny notations in the margins, little tombstones of memory. I'd filled that book with every blow, every verse used to shame, every hour locked outside in the snow, every bruise I'd named after saints just to survive. I took one step toward her. She looked at me, finally really looked. Her mouth opened. I didn't speak. I only smiled. And somewhere inside, I heard my younger voice whisper, "She won't remember this, but I will." I learned to be silent from the first blow. I was 6. It was a Tuesday. I remember because we'd just come home from church group and my shoes were still muddy from the playground. I'd gotten a question wrong during Bible trivia, something about Moses and a staff, and on the ride home she didn't say a word. But once we got inside, she yanked me by the wrist so hard I dropped my coloring book. The one with Jesus petting a lamb. I tried to pick it up, but she slapped me across the back so fast my body twisted on instinct. "You make me look like a fool," she hissed. I didn't understand what I'd done. The trivia question, the muddy shoes, my existence. She made me kneel on the rice she'd scattered across the kitchen floor, dry, uncooked, sharp. I was wearing shorts. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, watching like a warden. "You think God doesn't see what's in your heart?" I thought he saw everything. That's what she told me, that he saw me even in the dark. So I started keeping secrets in my head, twisting them around until they weren't real. Pretending was safer. Pretending meant I could survive. That night, I drew a picture of myself kneeling on rice. I used a broken red crayon for the spots on my knees. I hid the drawing behind a stack of hymnals in the linen closet. That was the beginning of the diary. I never called it a journal. It was my proof, my courtroom, my scripture. Every time she screamed, I drew. When she made me fast for cleansing, I drew. When she found me humming a pop song and made me wash my mouth with soap, I drew. Once I drew her with wolf teeth and preacher robes. I gave myself wings, but I erased them the next day. I thought that was too much like lying. I didn't cry often. She said tears were selfish. But I stopped looking in mirrors by age 7. And I started counting how long I could go without speaking. My record was 4 days. My teachers thought I was shy. Church thought I was devout. But I was just trying not to make a sound that would wake the monster sleeping 2 rooms away. My brother stopped looking me in the eyes when I turned 10. He used to sit with me under the stairs when it rained. We'd make up stories about being detectives or astronauts or underground kings. He was the only one who'd ever hug me without being told. But as we got older, he pulled away like my skin was made of questions he didn't want to answer. By then, she'd started calling me the strange one. Not by name, not even a nickname, just that the strange one, like I was a misplaced object in a perfect house. My father, he left when I was 8 or maybe 9. There was no goodbye, no suitcase scene. One day he was there, and the next morning his closet hung empty like a mouth missing all its teeth. When I asked where he'd gone, she said, "God removed him from this household." And that was the end of that. I still set 2 places at the table for a week after. She slapped me on the third day for it. I thought maybe my father had taken my name with him, because soon after she started calling me it. You tell it to come clean this mess. It better not wear that again. If it answers back, I'll call Pastor Monroe. She turned our religion into a costume she wore on Sundays and weaponized Monday through Saturday. She kept crucifixes in every room, not for faith, but to remind me what happens to disobedient children. Once I asked her why Jesus had to die like that. She locked me in the basement for doubt. I spent 5 hours tracing the cracks in the concrete, counting spiders like saints. My aunt knew. She visited once and saw the bruises, the way my hands flinched every time someone stood too fast. She said nothing, gave me a Bible with my name in gold foil on the cover, told me to pray louder. My cousin, too busy being perfect to notice I was disappearing. The house had rules. Rule 1, never talk back. Rule 2, never eat more than you're given. Rule 3, never contradict the book, even when it's used to punish. Rule 4, never ever speak about what happens behind closed doors. Especially not about her closed door, the one with the padlock, the one that clicked at 9 p.m. sharp when she'd pray and purge the demons of the household. I once heard her crying behind that door, but it wasn't the kind of cry that asks for help. It was the kind of cry that enjoys being heard. I knew then she wasn't broken. She was sharpening, and we were all just things she kept dull enough not to cut her. By 12, I had perfected the art of absence while present. I walked like I had no weight, sat like I took up no space. I learned to anticipate moods by the shape of her silence, whether it hung thick and punishing or razor thin and poised to cut. If the air was too still, I made myself invisible in closets. If the air was too loud, I waited behind furniture. My body was a map of bruise history, but she never hit the face. That was her one rule. We're not animals, she'd whisper as she twisted my arm behind my back or shoved my head beneath cold, running water. She made me fast on weekends to purify. I learned to chew mint leaves from the garden so no one would smell the emptiness in my stomach at school. No one asked why I was dizzy. No one asked why I sat in the back and kept my coat on all day even when it was warm. At 13, I began drawing the others' imaginary ones, shadow siblings who lived in the attic and whispered kindnesses to me at night. They had names like Ash and Clementine. They told me jokes, sang lullabies. I think they were the first versions of me who didn't flinch. I wrote dates in tiny numbers next to each sketch. I had over 300 drawings by then. I folded them inside hollowed books, stuffed them in pillowcases, rolled them into socks. That diary was a body, and I was building its bones from paper. The only mirror in the house was in her room. I hadn't seen my own face in years unless it was in a store window. Even then, I looked away fast. I didn't want to see the proof that I existed, because existing meant being responsible for her rage. Once she found a single drawing in my backpack. It was a picture of a small child curled under a table. Above it, written in shaky pencil, "Sometimes God turns his back." She screamed. She tore it in half, then into fourths, then again until it was paper snow. She made me kneel on the torn shreds. "You're making demons with your hands," she said. My knees bled through my school pants. She told me that was God's ink. That night, I burned the rest of that sketchbook. Not the diary I kept that hidden under the old furnace, but the one with the child under the table. I watched the pages crumple and blacken like falling wings. Then I climbed into bed, curled tight, and recited the Psalms backwards until I fell asleep. That's how I survived, by becoming less visible, less loud, less real. And yet I kept drawing, because some part of me refused to let her be the only one who told the story. At 15, I stopped feeling pain the way other people do. She'd say something cruel, something about my voice or the way my body didn't move the way she wanted it to, and I wouldn't flinch. I'd just drift. I called it the float, like slipping behind a curtain and watching it all from the rafters. That's how I survived the worst of it. The night she caught me humming a song, just a soft, wordless tune I didn't even know I knew, she stormed into my room and demanded I name the sin. I didn't know what she meant, but that didn't matter. She grabbed my music player, the one I'd found at a thrift shop, and fixed up myself and smashed it against the floor. Then she held my face in her hand, not slapping, just holding like she was inspecting something rotten. "You think I don't see it," she whispered. "The way you carry yourself, the way you tempt God with that voice you think He doesn't hear." She locked me in the closet for 2 days that time. No food, just a Bible and a jar of water. The closet had no light. I could hear the moths brushing against the walls. I began to see shapes in the dark. They blinked. Sometimes they breathed. When she let me out, I didn't speak. Not for a week. Not at school, not at home. My teachers didn't ask. They thought I was going through a spiritual phase. And maybe I was. Except in my version of religion, there was no God, only silence. By 16, the night terrors had started. I'd wake up clawing at my skin, convinced there were ants inside. Or fire. Or worse, that I'd started talking in my sleep and she'd heard me and now she'd come. With verses, with rice, with rules. I bit my tongue so often in sleep I had a permanent callus along the side. I stopped dreaming. Or if I did, I never remembered. Just woke soaked in sweat, shaking with my fingers clenched into fists so tight my nails cut crescent moons into my palms. The only time I felt real was when I was drawing. But even that changed. My lines got sharper, my figures more twisted. I drew a girl made of knives, a child with no mouth, only stitches, a house with no windows and a cross that bled, and always, always in the corner her face. But distorted, smiling sometimes, or crying blood, or wearing my skin. I didn't show those to anyone. I buried them deeper than the rest. But I kept the dates, because I knew someday someone would ask, and I wanted to answer without saying a word. I left. No one asked why. Not my brother, who had learned by then to keep his eyes forward, his questions buried, his silence polished like armor. Not my aunt, who handed me $50 in a church parking lot and said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Not even her, my mother. She watched from the porch, arms crossed, mouth tight. She didn't say goodbye, didn't bless me, just stood there with her Bible tucked into the crook of her elbow like a weapon she didn't need to draw. I carried one duffel bag. Inside 4 shirts, a cracked sketchbook, 3 rolls of drawings wrapped in plastic, and a flash drive with scanned pages from my hidden diary. I walked to the station, got on the first bus to anywhere. No plan, no home. Just a name I'd chosen for myself, a letter of acceptance from an art school in Chicago, and the bitter, glorious knowledge that I didn't owe anyone a damn explanation. I cut my hair that same week, dyed it black, bought a coat 2 sizes too big, and wore it like a shield. For the first 3 months, I slept on a mattress on the floor of a shared apartment with roaches and 1 working burner. I took night shifts at a diner, cleaned toilets, mopped vomit off linoleum. It was better than preying on rice. No one knew me. No one asked why I flinched when people raised their voice, why I couldn't sleep without noise, why I never took off my hoodie even in July. Freedom felt like dizziness, like walking on a street where no one knew the code words, where no one quoted Corinthians before hurting you, where I could throw away food and not be called wasteful laugh and not be called wicked. The first time someone touched my shoulder and I didn't jump, I cried in a bathroom stall for 20 minutes. Not from pain, from the terrifying unfamiliarity of safety. It would take years before I could speak without rehearsing. Years before I could stand in a mirror and not hear her voice judging every inch of my posture, every angle of my jaw. But I was out, and she didn't know where. I kept it that way. Blocked numbers, changed addresses. Built walls made of paper and silence and new names. And every night before I fell asleep, whether on a couch, a bus, or finally a bed of my own, I whispered to the dark, "She doesn't own this breath." And then I took another one. I got good at hiding how broken I was. Chicago swallowed me whole and let me rebuild myself in pieces. I worked, studied, drew like it was a ritual. My sketchbooks filled faster than I could buy them. Every line was a scream I couldn't say out loud. Every page was a prayer to a God who didn't punish. I majored in illustration and minored in silence. I wore my queerness like armor, not flamboyant, not loud, just real. They, them. A name I gave myself and no one took away. I found friends who didn't ask for explanations. lovers who knew not to reach too fast, therapists who gently touched the edges of memory and taught me how not to bleed all over every soft thing I loved. But I never told the whole story, not yet. I got awards, grants. My name started appearing in corners of magazines, in the credits of animated shorts, in whispered emails asking for commissions. But I never felt proud, only distant, like success was a body I could wear but not live inside. Because every night I still had the dreams. They came like static flashing images of cold tile, sharp rice, her voice like a hymn filled with hate. Sometimes I'd wake with my hands clenched, breath caught in my throat like I was still that child in the closet. I tried pills, I tried meditation, I tried sex, I tried silence. Nothing cured it. But something shifted when I opened the old flash drive again. I hadn't looked at it in years. It felt like opening a time capsule I'd buried in my own chest. There they were, the drawings, the diary, the index of pain cataloged with dates, margin notes, even floor plans of our old house marked with safe spots and danger zones. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't shame. It was evidence. I started writing. Not with fury, not with the fever of vengeance, just clarity, precision. Each chapter braided fact with feeling, image with injury. I didn't name her at first. I just told the story of a child who survived by drawing by, disappearing by becoming smaller than the violence around them. Publishers told me it was too much, that no one would want to read about a mother like that. Until one didn't. A small press run by a queer editor in Minneapolis said yes, said it loudly, said we need this. The memoir came out the year I turned 26. It was called Saints with Bruised Knees, and within a month it was everywhere. I returned to Chicago's South Side with a hardcover in my bag and a winter coat worth more than my childhood house. Not to see her. Not really. The book tour had brought me close. A signing, a panel, an invitation from a local arts nonprofit that used to be a church, not our church, but it smelled the same lemon oil and old forgiveness. I walked through the neighborhood just once. My boots were too loud on the sidewalk. The corner store was gone. The tree I used to hide behind had been cut down its stump, rotting in the snow like a forgotten witness. I passed the old house by accident, or maybe not. The windows were the same, smeared, tight-lipped. The porch sagged slightly to the left like it was tired of holding up ghosts. A woman in a robe came out, not her. She didn't live there anymore. I found out from my cousin, the perfect one. He messaged me after seeing the book on his girlfriend's nightstand, said, "Wow, powerful stuff," like he wasn't in half the chapters by name. She moved to Indiana, took a job at a Christian radio station. Of course she did. Of course she ran. But she hadn't run far enough. Because by then her name was starting to trend. People had connected the dots. The dates, the city, the radio show's archives. Her voice still thick with righteousness played over montages of my art. One clip went viral, her 2017 sermon about demonic children with no gender. It played side by side with a passage from my book. She prayed louder when she was guilty. She read scripture like it was a knife she'd polished just for me. I never said her name. I didn't have to. The book did well. Better than I wanted, better than I could emotionally process. It was on shelves in airports, tagged in posts by strangers crying in bathtubs. I got letters from kids, some 16, some 60, telling me they saw themselves in my pages. She must have seen them too, because one night, 2 weeks after a live interview aired, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. Her voice. Soft, shaky. I read it. I didn't think you remembered so much. A pause, long enough to hold an entire childhood. I thought you'd thank me someday. Then the click. I didn't respond. I didn't block the number, but I saved the message and titled the file confession.mp3. The day the radio station dropped her, I was eating miso soup in a quiet ramen shop halfway through a new sketch. My phone buzzed once a news alert. Local Christian broadcaster resigns following backlash to alleged abuse claims. No name in the headline, but I knew. She'd gone on air the day before to clarify things. She said it was a hard household. We did what we could. Some children are difficult. She said God forgives. She said my child is confused. And the internet, ruthless and holy in its own way, didn't let her finish. They dug, not for vengeance but for truth. Old congregants shared their stories. Teachers remembered the quiet one. My drawings, now sold in galleries and printed in art textbooks, became evidence, exhibits, receipts. The nonprofit I worked with quietly offered her community service. She declined. My publisher sold foreign rights to France, then Germany. A film option appeared in my inbox subject line. This deserves a screen. She sent another voicemail. Longer this time. No apology. Just noise, rambling scripture, tears, please. I can't afford groceries. They closed my accounts. They froze everything. They're saying things about me that didn't happen that way. Then a question. Can you help me just until I find something else? You've done well. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I opened my banking app. I didn't wire money. I didn't respond. I logged into the account she once opened in my name when I was 15, the one she used to hide church donations and government checks. I'd found it years ago, buried under a fake address. Never closed it, just watched. I changed the password, redirected the contents, what was left, into a charity for queer youth in abusive homes. Then I requested a new debit card. In my name, not hers. She had called me confused. She had called me a demon. Now her savings fed children who drew in closets, who whispered kindness to themselves in the dark, who one day might write it all down and send it into the world like a knife wrapped in silk. This was not justice. This was accounting. The last message came on a Thursday. A shaky voice, slower this time, like her bones had finally learned the weight of silence. I read your book again, she said. Out loud this time. I didn't remember it that way. But maybe that's the same thing. A long breath. You made me sound like a monster. Then another. But I guess I was. She didn't cry. I almost respected that. She ended with please. I don't have anywhere else to go. Click. I saved it like the others, labeled it final.mp3. Then I turned off the phone and never turned it back on. I didn't need to block her. She no longer had hands in this world that I built. No keys, no voice that could shut me down. She had lived in my head like a judge. Now she was just a recording, a ghost in a folder, a sound I controlled. I stood at the window that night, watched the Chicago skyline blink like a nervous heart. My apartment smelled like ink and eucalyptus and late ambition. I looked around. Every wall had something I made. Every drawer held pens and paper instead of fear. There were no crucifixes, no rice, no closets I couldn't open. And yet I still slept with the door locked, still flinched when a man shouted in the street below, still touched my wrist at night to remind myself I wasn't being pulled anywhere. That was the truth. Survival never really leaves you. You just learn to live in its echo. She doesn't speak in my dreams anymore, not because she's gone, but because she's already said everything she'll ever say. And now so have I. I didn't forgive her. I didn't need to. I simply became someone she can never reach again.